So good morning and welcome to the last seminar before the summer. It's a very interesting seminar about a bit unusual topic of digital policies. It's a great honor and pleasure to have Dr. Detlef Eckert here. Dr. Eckert has enormous experience. He has a PhD in economics, but then he actually worked in policy and he moved to the Commission in Brussels where he became director of DG Connect, and I interacted with him during the 90s and 2000s for example, electronic signature policy and other policies. But in addition to being very active at the Commission level, he also worked for Microsoft. In the beginning of 2000, Microsoft put trusted computing forward, and then Detlef then made his contributions there, and he also worked for Huawei. So I'm looking forward to his talk, 40 years of European digital policies, forgotten lesson. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bad. The question that I would like to, not to answer really, but to have my talk around it is the question of what can we learn from 40 years of digital policies for today. Because digital policies has now moved up relatively high on the agenda. And it was this kind of digital, this dual twin between digital transformation and green transformation. This was the mantra of the current Commission. And so now the Brussels crowd is now thinking about the next digital policies. So is there anything from the last 40 years we can learn? And this is a question which is not linear, because, of course, you don't have a linear process from the past to the present, but there are patterns, and there are ideas, and there are reflections from which we can draw some lessons. And this is what the talk is today. And my talk is a little bit metaphoric, so it's not going to an evaluation of policies one by one, but it's a bit a kind of metaphoric story. And in the late 70s, we had in the world actually a thriving home computer market. I don't know who remembers Commodore, Atari, and other things. Voila, a few. And in the UK in particular, we had some interesting entrepreneurs. Sinclair was one of them. And Acorn. And you know what has become a spin-off of Acorn has become the company ARM. So the world leader in the chipsets for the smartphones. This was a spin-off, a lucky spin-off of Acorn. And Acorn became a success for some time because of the BBC. Because the BBC launched a program, Computers to the School, at the beginning of the 80s. Way ahead of time, because later Negroponte came and with all this kind of laptop in every school and in every child in the world. So this was these days. And 12th August 1981, we had the launch of that guy, who finally became, by the way, the man of the year of the Times magazine. So the PC. And why is this noteworthy and not the Apple II, for instance, or the Macintosh, which was with a graphic card and mouse and so on and so forth, much more elegant than this beast? Well, it was IBM. And so we had, interestingly, two conflicting developments in those times with IBM. On the one hand, it's the market power of IBM, which pushed the PC into the market, changed the entire industry. And at the same time, because Bill Gates negotiated the contract, that the license for DOS, as an inferior operating system to Apple, by the way, to have it licensed to other companies. So you had two forces, competition on the one hand, because later HP and Compaq and others, they produced PCs. And 20 years later, IBM went out of the market and sold the whole stuff to Lenovo. And The other force was the market power of IBC, which pushed the PC into business and into the private homes. And against this background, we launched the Esprit program. Now, the Esprit program was not a direct response to the IBM computer. So that's what I want this is why I mentioned that at the beginning. There's no direct line between those events, but there's a pattern. And when you look at the justification for the Esprit program, it was, we are behind PC production. 9 out of 10 PCs produced in the world are not in Europe. Camcorders. We are behind Japan in camcorders. And you won't believe it, semiconductors. So semiconductors was high on the concern agenda, if you like. And the Commission, in particular the Belgian Commissioner Davignon, pushed for an IT program. And it took the EU more than 5 years to decide, despite the fact that we had 12 big IT companies, Siemens, Philips, Plessey, ICL, Olivetti, and Honeywell, Bull, you name it, pushing for it. It was the roundtable of IT12. So we had always, every 3 months, the big guys from those IT12 companies came to Brussels, sat around the table, and we were discussing industry policies. A big success, obviously, because almost no one of those guys survived the IT revolution. That's the sad truth about it. But the Esprit program was the first real research program, and its structure today remains in place. So we had 40 years where the main principles of the Esprit program, the European Strategic Program for IT Research, remains in place. But for some reasons, and this had to do with the launch of the Strategic Defense Initiative of Ronald Reagan, Star Wars as it was known, Mitterrand started a kind of counter-proposal, which was Eureka. Eureka still exists, but has lost all his power, if you like. But in those days, it was pretty significant. And it was interesting because we had a competition between the two. So there was a competition between Eureka and the research programs. Is that a good thing? Well, on one hand, yes, because you push each other. On the other hand, of course, it dilutes attention and resources. So there's no clear answer to this, what was basically the benefit of it. But Eureka started, it was intergovernmental, not EU. And for a couple of years, the DG Connect, those days DG 13, tried to fight against Eureka until they decided to join Eureka because the policy agenda was too strong. And where they joined was the so-called JESSI, and this was a kind of program for semiconductors. And over the time, Eureka repeated those kind of JESSI programs, semiconductors, until recently. So we had 40 years of semiconductors until the Horizon Europe. And until we got to the European Chips Act. So the difference between then and today is probably that in the Chips Act, the Commission recognized that without foreign direct investment, it's not going to succeed. So the EU is churning out a lot of money for Intel, TSMC, and others to invest in Europe. In those days, the Esprit days and the Eureka days, we tried it ourselves. We had in our offices a plan of chip factories. Can you imagine? A bureaucracy together with architects, designing a chip factory. DRAMs first, and then ASICs later. It was mainly driven by Paris. It was the filière électronique vision of Mitterrand and the socialist government in those days. It failed. So at least some conclusion is we cannot do it ourselves because our companies, so Philips went out, Siemens said, okay, we create Infineon and we stop our own big ambitions and focused on industrial semiconductors. So there was kind of adjusting to the market reality, which is reflected in the European Chips Act. But it is quite frustrating that the competitive situation, despite billions and billions of euros spent for those JETSI Plus programs and in Esprit, didn't improve our competitiveness in this area. We still have now with ARM and, of course, in the Netherlands, ASML, and some others, niches where we are top. And actually, this is something which is quite normal because it's called international division of labor. And so all this fuss about we need to be sovereign and so on and so forth has, of course, only one reason and one rationale, and this is geopolitics. From an economic point of view, it doesn't make sense to have a CHIPS Act, if you like. But for geopolitical reasons, we can discuss it. And you all know what I mean by geopolitical reasons. So this is the kind of situation that we had at the beginning, and it leads directly to the CHIPS Act. And for the research programs, Esprit told a very interesting story, because once it became clear it was not fulfilling its industrial objectives, the rationale moved to let's create a European research ecosystem. And this is still today one of the most convincing arguments for these programs. Let's create something together. But and in the following, most of the industrial objectives which the research programs came up with never succeeded. And that is one of the lessons that when we talk about the next MFF, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, and the follow-up of Horizon Europe, to be drawn. That you cannot simply repeat with a bigger program and a bigger program and a bigger program industry objectives that will not succeed. Now, we move to 83. I keep you guessing a little bit what happened on the date. So you see what kind of the structure of the talk is about. It's about 6 crucial dates. You could have chosen others. I have chosen those in order to tell you the story about how this kind of political development has moved to where we are today. And this day is about about 2 guys, basically, Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, the developer of TCP/IP. Now, it was not the day when they published it, but it was the day where ARPANET decided to move full TCP/IP. And this is a moment where actually the internet as we know it today was born. It was born by this decision of ARPANET to move to TCP/IP. And the story behind this is, of course, well documented, but for me, the key point here is that it was a parallel development, both in the US and in Europe. So what we have today, the internet is dominating everything, politics and so on and so forth, started as a research network, and it remained a research network way into the 90s. So nobody really realized the potential, and not even the Americans, which is quite interesting because Al Gore gave a very highly appreciated and widely quoted former vice president a speech about the national information infrastructure. He didn't mention the internet once, yeah, because the idea was that the future information infrastructure was built by telecom companies and cable companies and media companies. These were the guys. Nobody thought about Google, nobody thought about any of those internet guys. This was not in their mind. So it tells you the story, how you can miss a small thing which becomes very big in the future. Now, on this date, on 17th of November 1988, the internet came to Europe. And I believe this is a date which is remarkable. Nobody knows about it. If you ask someone in DigiConnect today, how did the internet came to Europe? Probably 8 out of 10 people may say, well, it was the World Wide Web term, Tim Berners-Lee made it. No, it's not the World Wide Web we are talking about. We are talking about the connection to NSFNet. And on that date, NSFNet sent a message to CWI, it's a computer center in Amsterdam, saying connected. And I believe we should celebrate this date much more, because it's a day when the internet came to Europe. And together, those guys, by the way, all Unix guys, individual guys, who traveled alone to the United States, were sitting together with John Postel, the kind of guru of the IP addresses, and negotiated how many addresses could we have for Europe. And out of this, they created RIPE. This is the Réseau IP Européen, which distributes the IP addresses. It's a fantastic organization. It's NCC, it's a coordination, and it's in Amsterdam. I think only a few guys from DG Connect ever visited a meeting of, I was one of them, visited RIPE meetings in Amsterdam. They're highly interesting. They told us very early about the development of the internet. They knew what is going on, but still, of course, they didn't see all this kind of commercial issues, because they were focused on the idea of research networks. And this one brought then a kind of protocol wars between the ISO standards and the TCP, the internet standards. And we in DG13, it was a time when I was active in DG13, not necessarily involved in this one, but I have to admit I didn't understand it either those days. And there was a fight between those two camps. And this shows you that you have to be open-minded of developments around you, and not going always linear into one direction. And the Commission is doing this again and again, going to say, we need to standardize something, and then they go linear. But they don't open their mind. Yeah. This is one of the stories, and they have, and if you ask one in the Commission about protocol wars, nobody, maybe one or two, will remember the protocol wars between the TCP IP, who won against the OSI standards. In those days, we were very busy with telecom liberalization, telecom regulatory framework, which was pretty much a success, I would say. We had 1998 liberalization, and we had in 2002 the framework which established a significant market power. So those incumbents were supposed to open their networks. And that leads to the so-called telecom codes, which was adopted in 2018, which mainly integrated everything and tried to do one thing in particular, namely, how could we incentivize investment in fiber optics, so in broadband, if you like. Now, in the past, the access regulation in telecom was all aimed at opening up legacy networks, so the coax networks and the copper networks, the twisted pair networks. But with new investments in fiber, the regulatory framework was at odds, because there was risk-taking by the incumbents. Competitors could have also invested in fiber. They didn't need necessarily to have access to the copper network, and so on and so forth. And this discussion remains until today. And it's a conflict between the traditional telecom network and the regulation, and TCP IP, which requires, the internet, which requires broadband and advanced networks. So we haven't solved it yet. And the organization, ETNO and ECTA and GSMA in telecom are now heavily lobbying, and you will see there's a white paper of the Commission these days about how to advance connectivity policy. And this is one of the biggest topics that we will see in the next 5 years. And it goes back to the RACE program. RACE program was more or less at the same time as the ESPRIT program, but RACE was different than ESPRIT. Waze had an interesting idea. It has a philosophy of a new network, integrated broadband communication, as was it called. So everything that is today, we need connectivity, high speed, and so on and so forth. It was there. It was already there. But they decided on asynchronous transfer mode as the leading technology. And it was all about also deployment, and they worked with the incumbents. But telecom liberalization and the TCP/IP killed this program. So whilst it was interesting to have an integrated program towards one goal, let's have IBC, let's have it around a European-driven technology, or the ATM was, of course, an international standard in technology, but by focusing on it and investing on it, we would be the leader. It failed. Telecom liberalization killed it, and TCP internet killed it. And so Esprit and Waze became together into an integrated program, and what we have today as Horizon Europe. The vision, the killer application, the people thought about this those days, were video on demand. It failed because IBC failed. The internet was not fast enough, initially not fast enough. And so it was a big hype around video on demand. Time Warner tried it many times in America, they failed. And in the end of the day, it turned out to be streaming. Nobody knew about streaming in those days. And DG Connect was, and DG 13 at this time, was always saying the internet cannot make video on demand. Way too slow, way too insecure, it will never work. At the end of the day, it worked. So this was the story about this kind of development around the internet, which has quite a significant impact on how we perceive the telecom and internet community today. So here we are in 1991, and it was one of the successes of Europe, of course. I'm talking about GSM. GSM today, no? I mean, when you're in Belgium and in France, when someone asks you for your mobile number, votre GSM, c'est quoi? No? In France, the same. Yeah, so GSM has become a kind of synonym for mobile communication. And this was the first call by the Finnish minister. And it was quite interesting that it was the Scandinavians who were in the driving force, whilst the GSM was born, the idea was born. I mean, first of all, there was a CEPT meeting 10 years earlier for the next generation of mobile communication, but France and Germany decided we should have one standard. Italy joined, the UK joined, and there was 5 years of intense struggle. The GSM story is well documented, by the way. It's a fascinating story, and it became a stunning success, leading to a memorandum of understanding. The management of this memorandum of understanding was the birthplace of what is called today the GSMA, the GSM Association. And it was published in 88. And then later it became the kind of foundation for the GSMA. So this, we tried many times for 10, 20 years, when you asked, okay, how should we do industry policy in digital? The answer was always, let's do it like GSM. But it was not to be repeated because there were some unique conditions at those days, which I cannot lay out in detail. But one thing is quite interesting and very often missed. There were a number of very, very smart people in the 4 capitals, in Germany, France, England, and Italy. And those 4 people had a big position in the ministries and understood what was going on technically. So they were not this kind of lackey, political lackey that you have today in many cabinets, etc., who have no clue what they're talking about. The main thing is it must be politically correct or whatever, yeah? And some headlines somewhere. No, those guys really knew what they were talking about, and they drafted, together with the telecom industry, this kind of memorandum of understanding. These were 4 people who actually were instrumental for success. And the lesson here is, if you really want to have success, think of people. So if you don't put smart people in charge and let them do their job, you will never succeed. And today, the European Commission policy is all about processes, it's all about politics, and never really about talent. I exaggerate, of course, but this is a little bit the lesson that we can draw from the GSM, why it could never be repeated. But it was a stunning success. We had, in the middle of the 90s, we had prediction that at the end of the 90s, we would have 40 million subscribers in GSM. Well, it turned out to be 150 million. It was one of the few predictions which we underestimated dramatically. So we were all blown away, which led to the big problem of 3G. Because we immediately wanted to capitalize on this system. Yeah, let's go for it. Let's do 3G, UMTS. And so we overdid it. And then our member state said, let's cash in. Because we gave the spectrum for 2G for free. No, we are not going to repeat this mistake again. Let's auction it in a way to maximize the revenues. So in those days, the revenues in Europe was about 150 billion euros taken out of the sector into the coffers of the finance ministers, and then UMTS didn't deliver. A big blow for the European telecom industry in those days. It was a political failure, in my opinion. I had a lot of struggle with, in particular, British economists, and because we're saying, yes, auctioning is the best way to allocate spectrum, and I was saying, no, it's not. And I still defend my position, and history may have given me some benefit of the doubt. 4G was a much better success. It was mainly, it came about, and it was just working fine. But it's linked also to the rise of Huawei. No? So it was the first time Huawei occupied a Chinese vendor occupied probably 30–40% of the market and became worldwide a 4G co-leader together with Ericsson and Nokia. 5G, you see the logos get more and more fancier. 5G, of course, probably Huawei has a technology lead here over Ericsson and Nokia. Now, it is linked also to a policy debate. But interestingly, what makes 5G better, or what is the difference between 5G and 4G? And here it's really interesting because you see the hype of the industry, including Huawei. You see the hype of GSMA, and you see how the Commission actually jumped on this. It was, by the way, the first time there was an action plan, because for 4G and 3G and 2G we never had an action plan. 5G was the first action plan. All the objectives were not reached, and it was all about transformation of the entire industry because of 5G. Give me a break. Yeah. So I had the privilege a bit to talk to some Huawei engineers who, of course, not in marketing, gave me a sober introduction into what 5G really can deliver. It's, of course, a very smart technology. It's a good evolution, but it's not a revolution. Why? What makes a difference? Well, there are two things in the essence. Of course, there are many other things, but one thing is spectrum. So if you have more spectrum, and if you have a spectrum in the 3 gigahertz band, you have characteristics of this of the mobile communication. And then, of course, you need antenna technology and some electronics around it, which makes it happening that you can actually MIMO, massive MIMO, multiple in, multiple out, and so on and so forth, and on beaming and all those kind of things. These kinds of antenna technology with the spectrum is 5G. Now we see slowly the standalone coming around. For 5 years in Europe, it was just bolting on 4G, and now 5G is coming slowly to standalone. But even then, the standalone solution must compete against existing legacy solutions, where you have LTE-M and you have LoRa and Wi-Fi and so on and so forth. It must be economically viable. So while 5G, the biggest advantage for the operators is it gives them capacity. capacity to handle all the video and so on and so forth. That's the big difference to this one. Now we are talking about 6G, and it's again about spectrum. What I can learn from the discussion and the papers is that it becomes sensing. So the spectrum is so high that it becomes possible that the networks becomes basically a sensing network. I can imagine we'll have some problems on privacy here, but we will see. So all this we need to move forward with 6G and get everyone out, and Europe can do it alone. We will see. If history tells us a lesson, then 6G will be very difficult to bring about. Now we move to 1994, and early 90s, we had the World Wide Web. As I said, many people still in DigiConnect would confuse and would say, yeah, Europe has launched the internet through CERN in Switzerland. Well, we know the story of Tim Berners-Lee, and not to forget, there was a Belgian guy who remembers the name. It was Robert Caillot, and he was also a guy in CERN, and who had probably the same impact on the World Wide Web development, so the HTML, HTTP, and URL development as Tim Berners-Lee. But Tim Berners-Lee was a bit more the out-looking guy. Robert was more inward-looking and making sure it worked inside CERN. Now, nothing would have prevented Europe from developing the browser. Nothing. The browser was simple. We had even European browsers. Nothing. But these guys did it. These guys did it. Netscape with Navigator. So there was a precursor, Mosaic. Interesting, by the way, the first time I saw Mosaic, the precursor of Netscape, of the Navigator, was Mosaic. And it was shown to me by Sun Microsystem, the big enemy of Microsoft, by the way. Yeah? And so Sun Microsystem had it, but they only used it for their own research, for their own internal communication. They never thought about making a product out of it. But Netscape, Jim Clark and Mark Andreessen, they made a product out of it. Now, it's so easy to say, well, this is the entrepreneurship in the US and so on and so forth. Yes, it's probably, yeah, it will be also one of my conclusions. But nevertheless, it gives you the taste of why over there? Why not here? Yeah? So everything was developed here, but in the end of the day, they picked it up. But I would have liked to choose another date. And the other date would have been 1 year later, actually it was in August 95. It was when Netscape went public, IPO. And that was the beginning of the .com boom. This was the beginning of e-commerce. When Netscape went public, it became the driver for e-commerce. Video on demand was dead, at least for the time being, and everything was on e-commerce. Everything was on e-commerce. And so everyone who had a .com web address got money from the VC, even in Europe, by the way. So we got carried away, and it was the moment when, even in DG13, we thought, well, maybe the internet and the World Wide Web is more important than telecom. It was the first time the penny has dropped. So it took us 10 years from the moment the internet came to Europe until we realized, and it took IPO of Netscape to do that. And this was then the moment for e-commerce. Now, this led to the bubble, which burst around 2000, and I think in March 2000, the stock market collapsed. But of course, it's a little bit like the hype in the IT industry is a little bit like a supernova. Huh? So it grows and grows and grows, then explodes, and either a black hole is left or a white star. So, and of course, for e-commerce, a white star was left. Today, you would call it maybe Amazon. Yeah. So that was basically the white star which came out of this explosion, and the white star was there. In Europe, there were more black holes left. Yeah. So unfortunately. But in Lisbon, a famous council took place where our leaders said we want to be the most competitive region in the world. It was a 10 years program, a little bit like the digital decade, but a little bit more ambitious. It concerned more than digital, it concerned everything. But the program failed. The digital part was actually praised by a lot of people. The reason was that, for instance, the internet was pushed by this program. The use of the internet was pushed by the program. Telecom liberalization helped a lot the internet to grow. For instance, the tariffs for long-distance calls. At those days, still it was sometimes via modems dropping. Liberalization of end terminals, and of course, local loop unbundling for ADSL. All this was very helpful. And so the digital part was pretty much praised because it had a number of highlights. And so if you select some low-hanging fruit, you can be successful. But going so big, it didn't really turn around. And we were reflecting. Actually, we were not reflecting. So there was a report by Wim Kok, the former Prime Minister of Netherlands, about why it didn't work out. But the economists came out with one simple explanation. European people do not want to live in the most competitive region in the world. That's simple as that. Because it's very uncomfortable. It has not much social benefits. It has pressure on people, it's liberalization, it's competition. No, we don't want that. We want something else. So that was, I think, the most convincing part of the explanation why it didn't work out like this. So, but Netscape had another interesting impact on the world. And this was on cybersecurity. So first of all, they had the cookies for e-commerce. So if you talk when we talk about the future of the cookies and the cookie directive of the EU, it started with Netscape because they wanted to facilitate e-commerce, and they introduced SSL to the world. Interesting, also not with cybersecurity in mind as such, but with e-commerce in mind. They wanted to have a secure connection for credit card transfer. That was the idea. And Tahir Al-Gamal came to the commission, and I mean, it was a meeting that I chaired at that time. So he came and said, I know you have a problem with your law enforcement. We in the US, we have the same. They want to break encryption. And said, I have a solution for you. Because law enforcement could, with a warrant, go to the server and intercept the traffic over there. But they don't have to intercept everything. So that was interesting. So we took this advice and promoted it to our member states. And it succeeded because the 1990 encryption debate, I traveled probably to 5 countries, in particular German, to the Ministry of Interior, to the military guys in France, because they were the one responsible, and to GSAQ and DTI in the UK. And they were all pleased by this kind of SSL solution, by the way. And the key argument we as a commission brought up was, if you want security for Europe, you need a strong industry. And if you regulate the industry, you make the industry weak and you make security weak. Do you want that? And if you talk to French people and say to them, to the French general, vous voulez que les Américains contrôlent toute la technologie de l'information, the answer is definitely no, partout pas, surtout pas. So that was mainly the kind of, it's this level of discussion you have in order to make policy happening. So it's not really hard science. It's basically just try to get a connection to some people on the other side. Don't lecture them, but give them some clues. So we solved the encryption debate. And it was a time when I could go to the RSA conference in San Francisco, 2,000 people in the room, and I could say the European Commission does not approve control for encryption policy, for encryption. I checked before with my commissioner, Martin Bangermann, he was a German liberal, said, yeah, do it. Today, I would be killed. I would be killed, I would be crucified in front of the Berlaymont. Yeah, so times of change, of course, no? But this was this kind of things. But we have now a revival, no? Because now the laudable objective of child protection, let's break all this kind of WhatsApp signal and Telegram encryption end to end, and let's see whether we can find something which is, of course, how we can protect the children more. So this debate, I think, Bart, you even wrote to the Belgians about the discussion which is currently happening. Another point in those days was the e-signature directive. It was mainly an idea to make sure that people understood that e-signatures are okay. It never really, let's say, developed a big business case in those days. But it provided a kind of useful ground for instance, the Belgian EID card and so on and so forth. But today we have eIDAS, and together with eIDAS we have the wallet and a new development. So the warning is really the business case. It's not really about, it's the ambition of the Commission to drive some standards into the field, but the business case is always the problem. And it was the problem with e-signature, and it will be the problem with the wallet. At those days, also, we created ENISA, the security agency. Everyone knows the security agency in Athens? Yeah. So maybe one word about this one. Because at the beginning of the 2000s, the focus on security moved from encryption and signatures and so on and so forth, to viruses, worms, and Trojan horses, and so on and so forth. The discussion in the 90s was, by the way, about protection against the state, not against social media and other companies. No? It was against governments. And government spying on citizens, privacy rules, and so forth. And with the new coming viruses, and of course the IT industry, Microsoft on top, was of course taken by surprise, quote unquote surprise, how easy it was to break into their systems. And so we had a discussion with the member states, and the member states pushed for, we need some conclusions, policy conclusions. And so we had two policy conclusions. We need to do this, the member states need to do that, and computer emergency response systems, and awareness raising, and so on and so forth. 1.5 years later, I had a meeting with the council working group, and I said, okay, could everyone give a report? What did you do with these policy conclusions? The answer was, you guess it, no? Nothing. And then I exploded, literally, I exploded. Sorry to be a little bit biographic now. I exploded and said, why you are agreeing to a text where you have no intention to implement? And this is happening again and again. When you see the Commission is proposing something grandiose, and the Council responds with even more grandiose. Europe needs that, and member states should do this and should do that. And happens nothing. Nothing, because there's a disjunct in the member states where there are people deciding something in Europe, unless it is, of course, legal, no? So, but if it's about politics, then it's easily forgotten. And so I said, okay, let's do something different. We create something at European level to help you. And then it turns out that what we had in mind was a kind of secretariat in the council, didn't work out. Then we wanted to have something else, and didn't work out either. And then we were in a meeting, and then some clever guy from the budget department, the colleague said, Detlef, you know what you're doing, what you're proposing? I said, no, Secretariat for Cybersecurity? No. He said, you are proposing an agency. And the pennies dropped and said, yeah, that's a great idea. And so I turned to Erkki Liikanen, the Finnish commissioner, and said, Erkki, we can have an agency for cybersecurity. And he said, yeah, it's a good idea, do it. And then, of course, the head of the DG Connect were against it, saying, oh, this is a lot of work, and we don't need that. And I said, oh, you have to go to the commissioner and ask him for his opinion. They did, and Erkki Liikanen said, no, I want this agency. This is the story of ENISA. So just to give you an idea how an agency can come about, a kind of sequence. One guy in the budget DG said, Detlef, you are creating an agency. I said, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do that. And I think it's quite revealing how politics actually it turns out. It's not so rocket science. No? We now have 3 big issues on cybersecurity, and I think I'm preaching here to the converted. I just want to tell you that from my perspective, we are facing 3 big issues now. So we rely heavily on cryptography and PKI. If something, so your group is working on post-quantum cryptography and so on and so forth. If something happens here, we are in big trouble. Yeah, so that's number 1. Number 2 is the question of AI. Is it good or bad for cybersecurity? Now, it can work both ways, but I'm not sure whether the Cabinet program and the Commission is fully aware of how to handle this one. And last but not least, and I think this is probably the one that will haunt us very much, is the cyber warfare. So we are moving away from kind of cyber attacks, criminal attacks, ransomware, and so on and so forth, to serious cyber warfare. Yeah. So I think these are the 3 main issues which will keep us busy over the time. This was the moment Europe lost the competitive edge. It was the iPhone. Nokia went down the drain. It didn't found a reply. Android, Google did. They were extremely lucky. You know this, no? Because they bought Motorola to compete against Apple. But in the end of the day, Android, which was peanuts for them, a couple of 100 millions, made it. So they bought the operating system Android together with the company, and it made it. Nokia could have done the same. No, I mean, why Samsung became big with Android and Nokia didn't? Because Nokia stuck to Symbian, and at the end of the day, they went with Microsoft, and 2 losers together. Well, it's not like in math, no? Minus times minus is plus. No. in the marketplace, in the business, minus times minus is minus to potential. No? So they failed. But the moment we lost in Europe completely the digital competitiveness was not only the iPhone, was not only the mobile phone market, which was, by the way, linked to applications, which we didn't see for the next 2 or 3 years. The App Store, actually, it's not the phone which made it. And Nokia always, and even some of our people were saying, yeah, but the phone of the iPhone is not good. Who cares about the phone? the app was the one that made the business. It took 2 years to understand this, or 3 years to understand this. And of course, the social media, we didn't make it. And the cloud, we didn't make it. It was one of the few things that Steve Ballmer did right in Microsoft. He realized the potential of cloud. So he pushed Microsoft heavy into the cloud, and it succeeded now. And the story of all the social media, you know. Question is why we didn't make it in social media and also in the cloud. To what extent data protection played a role? I mean, we had, in Germany, we had StudiFZ. Better service than Facebook at that time, but it was killed basically. We had Qing, that doesn't really work out in Germany. So the question is, it's easy to blame, yeah, we were too strong on privacy. Probably it's the mindset a bit. It's not the regulation as such and the idea behind. It's the mindset to say we can't do it because of data protection. Yes, you can do it because of data protection. That's the big mind shift that you need to do. It's a bit like in security. We can't do this because it's insecure. No, because you put security in order to do it. So you drive a car fast because you have good brakes. That's why you have security, not because you want to go slow. And I think this mindset still is too much in our mind. And so we lost the competitive edge in 2007 and following years. We were, by the way, very busy to implement what is called the digital agenda with Nelly Cruz. What we did at those days was everything that you can now find as digital indicators, and the targets, the broadband targets, and so on and so forth, came from this moment. But I can tell you, whilst social media exploded, whilst cloud computing grew, and while the mobile app ecosystem developed, the digital agenda had other priorities. And so the real lesson is, how can we really find the right priorities and not having 100 different actions as we did in the digital agenda? I can be blamed because I was the director in charge for the digital agenda, but you see how self-critical I am. I could put a little bit blame also on the cabinet side, who imposed on us certain policy. But in general, the DG was still not adjusted to the new digital environment, which was basically cloud, 4G, social media, and app stores. So it was overwhelming at those days. So here we are, arriving at the present. ChatGPT, it's a long story behind it, but it's interesting because since the beginning of Esprit, AI was present in our research programs. It only went under the heading of information and knowledge management. And at those days, we also had the 5th generation program. So if I go back to the first slide, the 5th generation program of the computing program of the Japanese, which was AI. But it was an expert AI system, not data-driven AI system. And the US reaction was fearful. I was saying, oh my God, the Japanese, they will run over us. Like today, the Chinese will come and run over us. So that was the kind of idea. But we had AI all the time. And a lot of European researchers was very, very active in AI. I mean, so we never were short of technology and people in AI. Never. It's the same thing like this, the World Wide Web. We had everything. We just didn't use it. So the AI strategy was the first one. After a couple of years that CNN, convolutional neural networks became the state of the art, and LSTM and so on and so forth, we had an AI strategy. The AI strategy did not mention GPT-1 once. It was the day it was launched. Then we had the proposal of the AI Act. A year earlier, GPT-3 was developed. It didn't mention GPT-3 once. And when the proposal came out, Gen IA was not in. And it was only later bolted on, and then it became a policy debate. So it was rather not analytically sharp. There's a policy issue behind, because the AI Act was mainly an act to support the first presidency of von der Leyen towards the president, towards the EP, because the EP loves regulation, by the way. So the European Parliament loves regulation because they are not a parliament with an autonomous budget and a right of initiative. They have to wait until the Commission comes up, and therefore they're knocking at the Commission's door. Do we have anything to regulate? Yeah. So that's a little bit, I mean, exaggerating a bit, but it's a bit like the climate of this one. And now we have the AI office. Okay, now you can discuss. It's a bit like the RACE program. Let's focus on one technology. Let's be integrated. Let's put resources to it. Yeah, it's an idea. Waste didn't succeed. It doesn't mean that AI doesn't succeed. But I have a little bit the idea, or I'm a bit afraid that we will see a supernova explosion. So the question is, who will be the white star leaving, remaining, or whether we will have black holes. And the question here is the future of transformers. And these two guys, this is the inventor of LSTM. It's a German guy who is in Hochreiter, who teaches in Linz, University of Linz. And this is Jan LeCun from Meta. And they believe the transformers could not be the end of it. Well, they might be wrong. People were also saying TCP/IP is not good enough, and in the end of the day it was. So the future is open here. But one thing the past tells us, be open-minded. Be open-minded. Don't miss the point when you have the explosion, and make sure that you are the white star and not the black hole. Now, this brings me to the conclusion, which I would like to remain metaphorical. And so, what has been shown is that we are not short of technology in Europe. Even despite what Ethno and others say, our telecom infrastructure is pretty okay. I mean, it could be better, but it's pretty okay. So it's not the bottleneck in itself. Actually, the bottleneck is a little bit entrepreneurship and innovation and so on and so forth. Now, everyone has realized this. So Pascal Lamy chaired a group. It was a former head of cabinet of Delors, then later commissioner for trade, and then director general for the WTO. He chaired a group and proposed to the Commission, we need disruptive innovation, so your Horizon Europe should be aiming at disruptive. But we have now learned that programs do not generate innovation. Entrepreneurs generate innovation. And so this is the Schumpeter entrepreneur that we need. We have them in Europe, and we should think more about them. So that would be the first conclusion at a higher level, and not the programs in themselves. And you need to have, the programs need to look at people, and not as 100 proposals from mediocre companies that do something. I mean, what I come to my mind is the Future Internet Initiative in 2010s, etc., where Telefonica was doing a lot of research and so on and so forth, and a repository of new protocols. Nobody cares. Yeah. This guy, Einstein, of course, I cannot miss Einstein. What he was saying basically, if you repeat the same thing again and again and expect another answer or another result, you're pretty stupid. And this is a little bit what European digital policies have been doing. They're trying again and again. So the research program became again and again a kind of platform for industry policy, and became more complex and more money. But in the end of the day, these were always the same. So there is the kind of, one should, and what is also interesting, that the narrative remains the same. So if you do this kind of little search about what Davignon wrote in the 70s, what the Esprit program wrote about the 70s, almost word by word you can use it today. Maybe occasionally you need to introduce something like internet or 5G or AI here and there, but very often the narrative is adaptable easily to today. So the narrative is the same, and so every commission and every policy development restarts. ICT changes the way we live and work. Yeah, we wrote this in the 70s. Don't say it again and again. Say why have 40 years of digital policies have not changed something for the European competitiveness. Why? And nobody starts. So you will see, I'm pretty sure, please look at what the new Commission will say. It will read like everything else before. Yeah, it will read the same. There's a lack of self-critically checking what has worked, what hasn't worked, what can we learn from it, how can we transfer this. And I think Paul Krugman is a Nobel Prize winner of economics. I do not agree everything he said and recommends, but he says one thing. He said productivity is not everything, or productivity increase is not everything, but in the long run is everything. So that's what it sounds, because without productivity increase, we are nowhere. So the history of human beings is about productivity increase. But nowhere in the digital policy you will find productivity increase as an objective. You will find competitiveness. But competitiveness is not the same as productivity. Bangladesh is competitive, but pretty poor. But they are competitive. So if we want to have our social model as our politicians want, you need to be productive. And the lesson actually from the last years was don't overload the digital policies with all kinds of objectives. They cannot make it. But try to use digital technologies to be more productive. That would be the lesson, the final lesson that I would draw. So I hope you enjoyed a little bit this journey into the past. It's less academic as you might have acquainted here to those seminars, but I wanted to give you a different story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating story. Any questions for Detlef? Let me kick this then off. So, given that you worked for Huawei, I mean, in the last years, we also have seen in this commission like all these policies to kick Huawei out of 5G. So, is this too late, or is this the wrong decision, or what's your view on this?
Well, I mean, it's not too late, no? I mean, the idea to push Huawei now out of the existing networks will be too expensive. The UK is experiencing this. Germany will not do this simply because there's no money, not enough money. So you have to live with what you have in the networks. I mean, the good news, of course, is from the geostrategic point of view that most of the time Huawei is in the RAN, in the radio access network, and not in the core networks. So this is where less of let's say concerns would come up. For 6G, the Commission is pretty hardcore, and they don't want any Chinese company involved. Probably they even don't want American companies so much involved in 6G, because it's a kind of digital sovereignty idea. I have my doubts whether this will be successful, because like the semiconductor industry, the mobile industry has become so global, so interconnected, so supply chain dependence. That's this kind of, we are sovereign, we do it all ourselves, is a bit, will be hard to achieve. In general, of course, the question of technology decoupling is behind all this. How do we handle this one? This is geopolitical, no? The question is, and now the US, of course, is trying now to maintain some of the core technologies. ASML is not allowed to send the latest lithographic products to China. No? So, but sooner or later they will do it themselves, because there are 1.4 billion people, and they have an education system whereby most young people study electronics, mathematics, engineering, and so on and so forth. So they have enough talents. A big problem for China, if I extend a little bit beyond Huawei, a big problem of China is immigration, because they don't have new ideas coming from the outside. So they hire some experts for specific tasks. They most of the time stay between 2 or 4 years, and then they go. So a few guys stay, but it's nothing compared to the US. So when you look at the entrepreneurship and the innovation coming out of the US, it's very much driven by immigrants. So the paper, attention is all you need. There was, I think, only one with a US background. All the others had a non-US background. And everyone left Google and set up their own company, besides one who joined OpenAI, actually. But the others all create their own. And so this kind of innovation from outside, China is missing. So they have their own generic innovation, and so Huawei is the same, because when they see a technology path, they go for it. And a good example, by the way, is PV for solar energy. So because Huawei was very active in rural areas in Africa and in Southeast Asia and in China. By the way, where Ericsson and Nokia people don't like to go, because it's hot, it's malaria, and so on and so forth. You don't want really to be there. And so the Huawei people went there, and then they had energy, so they had solar energy and had PV for their base stations. And then they realized, oh wow, with solar energy, we can make a business out of it. And now they are very, very big in the PV sector. And then, of course, it's scale. So the big advantage of Huawei is people are technically advanced and they have scale. But creativity and innovation is still a benefit and advantage of the US and Europe. You know, this kind of, because we get new ideas from people. Yeah.
Tom has a question.
Thank you. So indeed, you just mentioned China being a country where there's massive investment in engineering. I think I once heard that Xi Jinping, the president, also has a deep interest in engineering, and that this is not exclusive to him, but like the whole political elite. There's a lot of people with an engineering background, which is very different from my perception from the European cast of politicians and policymakers. And indeed, it came back in your story when you talked about it's the people, you need to have smart people in those cabinets to actually make progress. So to what extent do you think that this also plays a part in the very nice sort of bigger picture that you painted here?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of, if I can now talk with my German background, a number of successful German companies are run by CEOs with a technical background. It has changed a little bit. Siemens, for instance, and as soon as in Siemens the financial operators came, Siemens pulled out of IT, Siemens pulled out of telecom, and so on and so forth, because it was not beneficial, not productive enough. So they left the piece, for instance, to Cisco, although Siemens was as good as Cisco at the beginning. Nothing would have prevented Siemens even to buy Cisco those days. They didn't. So back to the politicians, that's, I mean, the Chinese upper class is very technocratic and very engineering heavy. May explain something, but of course, it's not always the good thing, no? That because then you're too micromanaging the kind. But with Deng Xiaoping, mainly in the 70s and 80s, the guy was saying to the Chinese people, well, now you can do business and get rich, please. And don't tell this to Chinese people, get rich. They go for it. They go for it.
Okay, question in the front. I'll just bring you the mic, just a second.
Thank you. So I'm coming from legal background and legal research at Center for IT and IP Law here and involved in several EU Horizon projects. To be honest, I didn't know the story behind it, and thank you for insights. My question would be about productivity aspects, and since we see that like technology promises efficiency and productivity in that way, we see also from political realm that totalitarian regimes are also promising efficiency by having monarchy kind of system. And these two ideas can go hand in hand, especially when we see the rise of rights wing in the EU and also other places in the world. So what do you think, what kind of productivity or efficiency we should look for in this policy making, because it could be tricky when it comes to power distribution and allocation? Thank you.
No, politicians should not try to be to drive the economy for productivity. They should provide the framework so that actually productivity can happen. No? Because if at the moment when in China the political class says you can be an entrepreneur, go for it, then you had productivity increase immediately. So they didn't need to plan it for us. By the way, CTE is public, state-owned. That's also a telecom company in China. It's state-owned, and Huawei is privately owned. But of course, they are all kind of connected to each other, whatever. But in principle, ZTE is state-owned and Huawei is privately owned. And Huawei is much, much better than ZTE, much better. So politicians should stay out of micromanaging the economy. That, I think, is the key thing. And the current digital framework that we have established in Europe has a tendency of micromanaging. One example, the initial legislation in telecom, in data protection, etc., we had about 15 to 20 articles. You can read this relatively quickly. The AI Act has 90 articles. The DMA has, I don't know, 100 articles. The GDPR has 90 articles. So everything becomes micromanaged, and also the codes. No? So the idea of initiating investment in fiber through joint investment, you have 4, 5, 6 articles that just manage this one. So if you want productivity increase, don't micromanage the industry. That's mainly the lesson. Put the framework. So if you want to reduce CO2, yeah, then put the framework so that CO2 gets a price, and it goes. So put your policy objectives where your policy makes sense, but do not micromanagement. I don't know whether I answered your question, but that's a bit the danger. Also the danger of authoritarian regimes, no, to put too much micromanagement into it.
Thank you.